Language changes our perception of the world. Negative events and negative policies are assigned positive words and definitions. The power to define is the power to control. Whether or not we're conscious about our language or the language of other people, words decide our understanding of a given issue. Our thoughts and actions are determined by the language we hear and are accustomed to. This is a combined statement and conversation analysis of Chris Watt's phone call with a private investigator and Anna, his prison girlfriend. Chris is looking for opportunities to appeal his verdict. I'll focus on how Chris depicts himself and his current situation. These depictions give us insights into his mind, his way of thinking. Chris engages in unreliable language that points to deception, and his language reveals a grandiose sense of self-worth, along with entitlement.
Hey buddy, how's it going?
Not too bad. Thanks for taking the call.
Yeah, is it just you, or is Anna on also?
I'm here too.
All right, cool. All right, so just talk to me. I don't want to be the one monopolizing the conversation. So tell me what you want to know from me, or just tell me what's on your heart.
Well, just going into law library as much as I have, I see a lot of cases. I've heard a lot of cases around here, guys. I've seen a lot of cases where the DA or the judge have had a lot of misconduct, but the judge has ruled, say, well, it's not egregious enough, or it's not that that wow factor enough to really sway in the defendant's favor. Now, I'm looking at the things that I know. I mean, I've never dealt with the law before, so all this. I'm winging it in the law library as I am. And, God directed me through little things like, through the poisonous tree, the Brady law, and different cases that, just they pop out of nowhere, but I know what God is putting in front of me. And I see all these things that relate to my case. I just don't know, how to frame this, where, like when I do this 35C, I've had this paperwork with me for probably a couple months, and I know I only have a year left to appeal some of those Class B and C felonies at a 3-year limit and a 2-year limit.
Establishes a relationship with the other speaker. It's an associating linguistic element. The expression presupposes that the speaker tells the truth, even though the hearer doesn't actually know, as the expression otherwise implies. Just downplays what Chris is about to say, even though the information he ends up giving is comprehensive and self-serving. I mean is a hedge signifying probability rather than certainty. This, along with Chris's modest expression winging it, corresponds to his downplaying. However, notice how his quote-unquote modesty or unassertiveness conflicts with his following statements where he makes God the grammatical subject and himself the object. Chris prefaces this first reference to deity with the associating so linguistically he's expecting the private investigator to believe in both types of accounts, one that's modest or unassertive and one that's highly assertive. Assertive because Chris uses the verb know, not think, and because it's now God who puts these other cases in front of him. Chris removes agency from himself. Notice how this utterance, which again makes Chris the grammatical subject, is placed after the reference to God. Linguistically, Chris's I and God are one and the same, and they happen to believe the same. Chris reveals the real reason for his prologue about what God has allegedly shown him. Time is running out for Chris, but instead of saying this directly, he used God to disguise it. We should take into account that in the CBI and FBI interviews, Chris also hid behind God's authority and told bold-faced lies. Listen to this.
I don't know where they're at. Honestly, I do not know where they are at. If I could have my babies back home right now, I would. I want them back. I want everybody back. That is God's honest truth. Okay? I mean, that's God's honest truth. Okay?
In statement analysis, it's understood that deceptive people are more likely than truthful people to use mild oaths like "I swear" and the idiom "God's honest truth." They are more likely to appeal to deity for self-serving reasons. Chris has no problem lying in God's name. Despite his appearance of holiness, nothing's too holy for him.
And I really want to figure this out where I can do it in the right time frame, but also like not rushing anything. And I just want to get out of here. I know that God has a plan for me, and it's to be in prison right now, but not stay here. Because He brought me here for a reason. But He also wants me to do something on the outside. I know I just can't sit here and just wait. Because I know there's waiting, doing nothing, and there's waiting that seeking an action verb. That's what I'm doing. But I also want to know like what action to take, because I have no intellect when it comes to the law. But I know He can teach me, and that's what I'm just waiting for. Like things to fall into place. I still know how to do it.
I got you.
Chris says it himself. He just wants to get out of there. The adverb "just" undermines his references to deity and once again reveals the simple truth. Chris is consistently trying to make his mission sound greater and more noble and pure than it actually is. Notice the wording again. Chris knows that God has a plan for him, but the only reason he's able to know is because it's his own thoughts, his own plan. Self-repairs are often used to make statements less direct and less honest. Here, Chris goes from a negative "it's not" to a positive "it is," as if suddenly remembering that he has to sound modest. However, this modesty is undermined by "but." This paratactic conjunction minimizes or negates the statement that preceded it. In this case, that it's God's plan for him to be in prison. He prefaces the "but" utterance with the restriction "right now." Chris pretends to know the duration of God's alleged plan, and he places focus on him getting out, while minimizing God's quote-unquote old plan. Chris is not describing God's plan. He's negotiating with himself. He hides behind God's ethos, credibility, and ability because he himself has no ethos. The conjunction "but" also wins when Chris now undermines that God brought him in prison for a reason. Obviously, Chris's focus is on getting out, so now he has to undermine what he previously called God's plan for his life. As an adverb obviously indicates certainty, a shared certainty between the private investigator and himself, that is, even though the investigator has no knowledge of this. This is manipulative language. Obviously corresponds to his repetition of the assertive verb "know," indicating certainty, unlike his unsure statements in the beginning of his prologue, what I called modesty or unassertiveness. Here, the simple truth is revealed once again. The criminal justice system has always been full of criminals claiming to have a strong relationship with God. Their stories imitate emotion and are ultimately calculating. They know that invoking God's name is a profitable way of gaining people's sympathy. We should never underestimate the power of feelings, the power of pathos. In the 1980s, the scholar Walter Fisher said that the narrative world paradigm had replaced the rational world paradigm, in part meaning that in the postmodern society, personal feelings conquers logic, known as logos, cohesive and consistent arguments. Fisher said this in a time without social media, but obviously social media have contributed to making everything more emotional and opinionated. Everyone can create their own narratives in words or in pictures and read the narratives of others. Many people react more to narratives, personal stories, than they react to statistics, moral principles, and even evidence. In the past, Chris had no problem lying in God's name, so by inference, he should have no problem doing it now.
Well, okay, let me address a couple things in what you just said. First of all, you live in a closed society now. Every door is shut in your face. You cannot go from you go to one wall, you can't go further. You got to turn your left, you can't go any further. So, you know what I'm saying? You're in this perpetual, this room with no door, so you cannot get through. You got that? You understand that? What I'm trying to say? So your world is controlled. You hear the word no probably more than you hear the word yes. in that system. So one thing you need to be very accustomed to is being denied, being turned down, being told no. You with me?
Yep.
So just keep a positive attitude about all that, and don't take any steps back. Just keep moving forward. Even if it's a small step, move forward and not backward. Okay?
Okay. Just like in my devotional today, it was mentioned Esther. It was a door Pope, and the Lord was speaking to Esther, and she was saying to the Lord, I've led you to the wilderness, but I will plant in that wilderness vineyards. If you go through the valley of Kor, which is the valley of trouble, I will put a door of hope. So even though you're in a wilderness, you're going to plant vineyards in that wilderness. Though you're in the valley of trouble, there's going to be a door of hope in that trouble.
He's using a narrative to create identification and to persuade the private investigator and Anna that his story is similar to Esther's. This is our first clue that Chris doesn't view himself as a bad guy. We find the second clue in his choice of grammatical subject. Notice the phrasing. Chris is once again assigning agency to God. According to Chris, God has put him in trouble. He doesn't point to his own actions and thus avoids accountability. Also to Chris, his knowledge is equal to God's knowledge, allegedly knowing that there will be vineyards. In his prison interview, known as the confession interview, Chris also made sure to speak as if he was a different person at the time of the murders.
And every time I think about it, I'm just like, did I know I was going to do that before I got on top? Or
Really? That's an interesting thought, Chris. You don't know if you knew.
like, I try to go back in my head, I'm just like, I didn't want to do this, but I did it. Everything just kind of like...
You felt like you had to?
It just felt like it was... I don't even want to say it felt like I had to. It just felt like there was already something in my mind that was planned that I was going to do it, and then I woke up that morning and it was going to happen, and I had no control of it. It's kind of like I just thought my life just disappeared before my eyes, but it just like I couldn't let go. It was like somebody else, like if you picture somebody else around you, holding your hands, holding you, keep you from not letting go.
Blaming another entity for one's own wrongdoings is common for people with antisocial personality disorder or a low level of empathy and arousal. It tells us a lot about Chris's self-perception that he portrays himself as the protagonist in this biblical account.
So, Chris, what were you saying before we got cut off about when he asked, I can't remember what it was, but you were talking about the evidence and your confession that wasn't true.
Well, I just know that, like, I've never experienced anything like this before. Like, from the tragedy that happened, from the law enforcement to the interrogation, the jail, the prison, all this was new. All this was new. And I know that even though I've never had something like this happen before, I knew the shock and the trauma was there in my mind. I didn't know how to process things.
Proportionally, very few people have experienced interrogations and time in prison, so in reality this isn't about Chris, even though he tries to make it about him. His focus is himself at the onset of this passage, and he's foreshadowing an upcoming complaint. It's interesting to note how he prefers mind verbs like know, which is his favorite verb throughout the phone call. Also, he makes a reference to his mind. What's most important to us manifests in our word choices. Subjects with reduced empathy and low arousal prefer mind verbs and often place their rare feel verbs in unmotivated places, because they're not in touch with their feelings and they maintain an intellectual distance to them. We continue noticing his point of view, the shock and trauma he experienced, not the shock and trauma he exposed his victims to. This utterance speaks to a need for control. How to process things is a euphemism in this regard.
Every question that they asked me, I was just agreeing with them and just going along with what they said, because I was like, well, I guess we got to tell them something. And even when they came here to prison and interrogated me, they were in the street clothes acting like they didn't, they were just talking to me, when in retrospect they were actually interrogating me again. And I know for a fact that, that interrogation they cannot use, because they were here in Wisconsin, and they're all interrogation to the first one, and all that was like a coercive type psychological intimidation of someone that, had never been in that situation before, and they just used that to their advantage.
This statement is interesting on at least two levels. First, to say that he just agreed with every question is a hyperbole which is easily falsifiable. Second, he involuntarily admits that he's unreliable. If he was just agreeing with them then how can we ever know if he's telling the truth, including in this phone call? His unreliability is further evidenced by this utterance, as if he was doing the agents a favor. In the confession interview, the agents were explicit that Chris didn't have to say anything he didn't want to.
Your case is completely closed. Nothing about what we're going to talk about today has anything to do with an open investigation. So we're not here to get more charges on you or get any statements from you that are going to jam you up anymore, right? That's all done. So all of our cases are closed and the court case is closed. So there's nothing that we're going to talk about today that's going to get you in any type of more trouble at all. Are you available to talk to us?
Definitely.
Okay. If there's something that you don't want to talk about, that's okay. We might press you a little bit. Okay, we might say, well, do you mind if we just maybe then ask one question? If something makes you uncomfortable, just tell us. We're going to talk about some hard issues today, but I don't intend to take you to a dark place today.
Okay.
I hope that when we're done, you'll feel better. I hope it'll be therapeutic. We're going to talk about, obviously, what happened with your family. And so that's going to be hard to talk about. I appreciate anything you can tell me about it. If you need to take time out, if you need to get a tissue, that's fine.
Yet he chose to detail his crimes. But instead of blaming himself for this, he blames the agents. Chris wasn't deceived, he just doesn't like to be outsmarted, because being outsmarted is synonymous with the loss of control. This is as close to the idiom judging a book by its cover as we get. Chris reveals to us what he pays attention to and what fooled him. Obviously, wearing street clothes was a clever strategy on the agent's part. Chris is most likely unaware of this, but linguistically, he makes a distinction between talking and interrogating. However, this is a made-up distinction. When it comes to the facts of your actions and presupposed you're a truthful person, there's no difference in what you would be saying in a conversation versus an interrogation. Chris assumes a difference. He repeats multiple times in this passage, so this information is highly sensitive to him, meaning he's very self-aware and aware of the private investigator. Chris says, use all this stuff against me. Stuff is a minimization of the hard evidence against him, a caricature. We observe this in the political arena all the time. When a politician seeks to redefine an issue or a concept, they undermine the old definition to make way for their own. Suddenly, what was once moral and decent is now immoral and old-fashioned. Chris is really depicting himself as the protagonist here. Apparently, he's the bullied and the agents are the bullies. He returns to the beginning of this utterance when he mentions that he'd never been in that situation before, and we now have a so-called full circle. Ending where you started shows the hearer that your account is now done and there's a transition relevance place. But notice that he's changed the personal pronoun I to someone, which is unspecific and generalizing. He's pointing away from himself and associating with any person who could potentially end up in the same situation. Association is important to Chris. He associated with Esther, and his use of is excessive.
You just didn't know what was going on, and it's a game. That's what I tell so many people. This is a game that they're playing. You are the prey. They're the hunter. You're the prey. And they've got you exactly where they want you. And most times they're going to get what they want. Because you know what? They keep you for hours. They deprive you of your basic needs. And as every second that you're with them in that chair and they're bearing down on you, your mind is actually deteriorating. Your mind is playing games against you. And that's why we have so many times where people give confessions for things that they just did not do. And it's because, you know what? they want to get out of there. They want to just tell them what they need to know, what they're asking, what they're interested in, so they can get out and go home. Well, you know what? Guess what doesn't happen? They don't go home.
So strange. But the thing I know, like where you're talking about playing a game, is when the TBI agent and the FBI agent, like when the TBI approached the woman, when she like questioned me for hours, and then after those hours of interrogation, she puts me on a polygraph. And then I'm like, exhausted at this point. And then after that, like, I'm sitting in there alone, and I hear them. It's the film intercom doesn't pick it up. I hear them outside the door. The FBI agent comes up to, "Oh, how did you do?" And she said, "Oh, he did pretty good, but I think we get some more out of him." And they come in with this game face, saying, "Okay, you lied." I'm thinking to myself, "Wait, I thought you just said I did pretty good." And I didn't question about it. I just believe what she said, and they said I made it. But I know for a fact she said, "You did pretty good, but I think we get some more out of him." I'm just like, I'll only think about this stuff way after it happened.
All right, Chris.
Like, wow.
In a truthful memory account, we expect past tense, because the event that the subject allegedly recalls has already occurred. Shifts to present tense indicate that the subject's not speaking from experiential memory, or at the very least, entirely from experiential memory. Chris makes important shifts between past and present tense, suggesting that he doesn't relate to his memories as completed events. He's rehearsing what to say, presenting supposed thoughts and quotes to the private investigator. This is possible deception. Furthermore, notice that Chris's complaint is inconsequential. What he's criticizing doesn't change the facts of the case, the facts that he admitted to. Chris hasn't suffered an injustice. He just fell for the agent's standard procedure when a terrible crime has been committed. He's avoiding accountability at all costs. This is the one thing that's consistent in his many unreliable statements. Chris Watts is able to lie and not think twice about it. He's able to dispose of his own flesh and blood in the most inhumane way and still go on living. A person's language doesn't lie. Chris appears incapable of experiencing and thus understanding the fullness of human emotions. Sadness, happiness, joy, guilt. He equates his own knowledge with God's knowledge. There's always been a human need for categorizing behavior we don't understand. It's a coping mechanism with a complexity reducing and thus cathartic function. However, the categorization is a distant second to Chris as an individual, his specific actions and his specific language patterns. Language analysis is one of the few sciences that allows for truly case-based conclusions while still welcoming more general discussions. Chris Watts is an important case study. People like him must never go under the radar.